Whitelist.io.
So, first guest of the relaunch. Didn't tell you that part, Angela. So we have the pleasure to have Angela Coldwell from Honor the Work and many other things joining us today. And the reason why, Angela, I picked you first is because, well, I think you have a really unique story about what you do with Honor the Work. There's a neat story of how the heck you ended up in Honor the Work and how you launched that. And I really want to get into, as I said to you, like prefacing this conversation today, why? Like, I've been in this space for years and I work in the space, and, in the space, in case you all forget, is helping support individuals get into apprenticeship pathways, consider them careers, try to culture a bit of a change in terms of mindsets, whether that be educators, parents. I call it influencers, which I hate the term because it's so coined now for social media. But the reality is, like, when you think about people that are making decisions in life, they have influencers, right? And that could be family members, that could be close friends, that could be, people they see as mentors, teachers, whatever, right? So a lot of people have an impact. And so anyways, that's where the term comes from, in case you didn't. I know you know, but audience-wise, in case you didn't know. So anyways, I'll stop there. And Angela, maybe take a second, tell us, I introduced you. Tell us what Honor the Work does. And then I'm going to ask you about what you did previous to Honor the Work.
Sure. So our biggest goal in Honor the Work is to support elementary education, in particular to bring skilled trades to the classroom through teacher lessons that are curricular, through support with hands-on materials, as well as books. And so the whole idea is to meet the teacher with the needs that they have. They have to deliver curriculum. They want to bring beautiful and diverse children's books to the classroom, and they'd like to do more hands-on learning, but they don't necessarily always feel comfortable or have the time to do so. And so they also talk about careers, but they tend to be the ones that, are the quintessential, the doctor, the veterinarian, the nurse, the police officer, all of which are incredibly important. But we are going through a huge transition right now in the world globally, and we're in a skills economy, and we're in a fourth industrial revolution, and our nation, amongst all nations in the world, we all need more skilled labor. And this is something that as educators, we don't ever learn about when we're going through our education as undergrads, but it's also something that, generally speaking, as we go K to 12, back to university and then back to the classroom, it's not something we've been exposed to. And yet there's such a huge demand for it. So my husband and I saw a real opportunity, him being in industry and me being a teacher. How could we help to bridge that gap in a way that was actionable? And so that was where the idea of Honor the Work came from.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Okay, so teacher, you were a teacher. I picked out of that. We talked about this before. So can you give us a little runway? Like, one of the things we like to do with our guests, and I've really want to dig more into that this time around. Did you always want to be a teacher?
No, actually, when I was, funny enough, in my grade 12 year, it was about April, and I phoned my parents from a college where I was watching a local basketball game, and I said, I think you were right. I think I would like to be a teacher after all. I think I'm going to change my mind. And my parents were both teachers, and they had always said, I think you'd be a good teacher. And, a typical teenager, I thought, no, I don't think so. I don't want to repeat what my parents did. And long story short, I ended up coaching a basketball team in my grade 12 year. Rather than playing, I coached a JV boys team, and I loved it. And all of a sudden I realized that teaching was really something I loved to do. And I realized I could take my love of science, but go and do it in a different way. And medicine wasn't laying my spark anymore. It was really the ability to work with kids and teenagers in particular. And so that's really what led me to wanting to become a teacher. And so I ended up going and getting my education and my science degrees. And then from there, funny enough, I was a biology major, but my teaching assignment pretty much all the years was my minor, which was chemistry and physics. And I loved it. And so it's kind of one of those things where you kind of accidentally get into something that you love, not necessarily because you were really mindful of it, but you just had experiences. And that ultimately has informed so much of what we do now.
I really appreciate that capture, because that is the reality. Like, that last year of school can, institute so many different changes because your eyes are opening so much broader because you're leaving now. So then the little experiences that you might have had, like, you could have had that experience the year prior and it might not have had the same trigger effect because you were so locked in. And so I don't discourage anyone, as much as parents out there would want to like hate me for this, but if your child is on path for A and then in the last 6 months of school they're looking at B, like, dig into that for a second. That's not a bad thing. There's a reason they've shifted. Now get into the reason. Make sure it's not friends and all of a sudden crushes becoming realities or chasing people that you didn't know they were chasing. Like, there's all those little intangibles that we see in film and television and life, but that don't be scared of that. There's a reason. Something has happened. There's a trigger. And we see that a lot. Like I mean, we see it more now in grade 9s and 10 that kids are interested in the trades. We hear it often. This is a great conversation. But predominantly we see it closer to the end where college or university doesn't quite seem to be the fit for many reasons. Maybe it's financial. Maybe it's the programs don't make any sense. They're really like, I want a job. I actually want to be working. Like if I go to school, I want to connect it to a job. And everyone I've talked to about school doesn't talk to me about jobs. And I want the job part. And listen, that's the business of college and universities, is to educate based on industry. That's their job. Okay. That's what they do, is what you pay for. It's a service. And that's okay. Some of them are good at trying to dig in and help those connective tissues, but a lot of times that doesn't happen until you get successful in 1 or 2 or 3 years of your course. Then the college is like, okay, now that you're getting to the finish line, we'll help you then, right? Yeah. Maybe, depending on the school, the connection, the industry. Like, I mean, there's onesies and twosies, really, sadly. So anyways, we hear that, and that becomes a motivator. So I like to highlight that a little bit. And it's funny because when we first talked, you didn't mention medical. Like that wasn't like, that's an extreme jump, because medical is a commitment for a boatload of school, right? Like that's a big commitment.
And that was, I think, part of the reason my parents didn't want it, actually. So interestingly enough, so many parents do want their kids to pursue medicine. My parents didn't want that for that exact reason. My dad was a high school principal for much of his career. My parents were both teachers. They had seen lots of students go in a variety of trajectories, and my parents were very supportive of all of them. Whether it was a skilled trades route, whether it was a college route, whether it was to the workforce. Like I grew up in a family where it was all accepted based on what was the best fit for you. And so it was actually very much like it kind of dissuaded, which is kind of the opposite of what a lot of parents want. And I think that, what you've said about employability, I think right now we've got a lot of kids that they want to be employed. They realize that they want to have a career path. They don't want to just go off and get schooling that doesn't lead them somewhere. And also I can't tell you the number of students that I've had over the years where they came and said to me in their last year, I don't know what I want to do. And I said, it's okay. Like, I changed my mind too. And there was all of a sudden like the relief on their face. Like, you mean you changed your mind? Like you have to be vulnerable with them, and you have to say, it's okay. Like I made a choice that was a change. I made these mistakes. Like it's so important that they see that as a role model. But then, they'd come back often in their first year and they'd say, I don't like my program. It's okay. There's going to be a certain number of courses that will transition over to your new program. And that's part of the process you're going through. But I think one of the things though, as a teacher, I would love to be able to see more of though, is how do we better support students earlier on in their journey to be giving them more exposure so that they're not kind of finding this grade 11 and 12, those years so stressful, and just kind of applying to a program because it's something that they've heard the name of, like engineering. They don't actually know what it means, but they've heard of it, right? And so we really, I think, can do a variety of different things to support students better so that conversation isn't waiting until so late in the game, which is high school. And I think that's, part of why we really wanted to create Honor the Work, because we wanted to start an elementary school. And there's a whole variety of brain reasons that support that, but also just workforce as well would really support the idea that the longer children have for exposure, the better they're aware of what careers are out there. So the better they can get matched up to something that they truly want to be pursuing, as opposed to something that just has a name value associated with it.
No, and I appreciate that. And I was going to say, you linked yourself very quickly to like how some of the why that you have, like, and forecasting and looking at this conversation. Let me rephrase that. Let's say this. I would say this, that the system currently, right, has a method, and I mean, it's an improvement. Okay. Because I mean, those that have watched this show hear my story, right? Professional wrestler, guidance counselor, want to go Shawn Michaels Wrestling Academy. They don't want to talk to me anymore. And I get that. I mean, now that I'm in my 40s and some 17, 18-year-old smartass does that to me, I'm like, yeah, I probably don't want to talk to them either. Like, you're not taking this serious. I'm not taking you serious. And so whatever. I mean, that was how I cried for help, but it was, whatever, that was me. And so, but introductions to alternatives earlier, and the awareness that it's okay that these alternatives are different, that's super helpful. And we'll dig into that in a second here. The piece I was going to comment on is that, the selection piece they do now, basically grade 8. So we're again, Canada-centric, folks, apologies. And if it's the same where you are, that's amazing. I have a lot of people from Australia and US watch this so far. Anyways, I mean, bless the Australians, because I can have a whole conversation about asbestos, how they're way ahead of us, and that's my day job. Anyways, so the in high school, grade 8s and grade 10. Right. So grade 8, they start really trying to get you to think a little bit more, because you can pick a high school in some cases. Now, I grew up, and a lot of people in Ontario grew up in places where you don't get to pick the high school because there is only one servicing that area. So that the conversation doesn't happen. But in some more, less rural areas, you actually get a choice in some cases. And so you do start thinking a little bit more about what you might be interested in. Now, I mean, I've met a lot of great 12, 13-year-olds, but they're not making a life decision at that point. And if they are, great, but that's like a unicorn, right? They know what they want to do. They probably knew what they wanted to do when they were born. So it's like, it's inherent. They're going for it. They got some magical talent. There's just something there, and that thing's there. And that's just really, really rare. And that's cool for them, and everybody else is okay that you're not that. But they have the skill trade conversation in 8, which isn't really deep. And then in grade 10, they let you do your careers class. And in that careers class, they go, okay, skill trades. And the stuff that comes up, which is always very fun, engineer, architect. I'm like, how is that a skilled trade? You're going to university for 4 years. You're probably going to need a master's, right? And you're going to have to, you're looking at 5 years plus. There's like internship. Like, you definitely don't come out in an apprenticeable body at all. So, I have this bias where when I say the word skilled trade, I always connect it to apprenticeship. Now, I know that's a bad habit of mine, because not all skilled trades actually have apprenticeships, but the good majority in Ontario, like 140 plus, do. And, you're sitting with, I think, roughly 50 in the construction sector. I think 25 or 35 are apprenticeable. And so you still have like almost 100 trades out there that are in every other sector doing different things. And so, there's a lot of opportunity, and none of them are engineers and architects, by the way. I just want to point that out. Like, none are. So
the irony of that is, like, those are like the technical jobs, and the people that don't necessarily know how to actually build. Like, they understand how to have it on a blueprint, they understand the forces, but if you ask them, is this actually buildable? Like, if you have to go get like hammer, nails, go on a job site, that's often where
you're giggling because what does your husband do again?
Pardon me, sorry?
What's your husband's background again?
So my husband is a civil engineer, but he comes from a very long trades background, and he himself actually worked at a framing company back in high school.
Okay.
So he's really great with tools, and he's a huge proponent for having people in the trades, actually part of that conversation when you're actually looking to go and look at, you've got the bid that you've got to make. Where are the things that we have to be mindful of? Having people who are on the tools in the room. Like, he was very much wanting to move in that direction before he decided to create a consultancy, because he knows the value of people who work with their hands. And funny enough, he was one of the main reasons, not only that we created Honor the Work, but he was one of the main reasons that my bias changed as a teacher too, back when I was, teaching high school chemistry and physics.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to jump right into that, but I just want to give your husband some street cred, because I knew there had to be something more to it. And then you started doing the engineer conversation. I thought, okay, hold on, I better make sure you got some street cred on this for him. So you're teaching chemistry and physics, you said? I
was, yes.
Okay.
So yes.
Tough stuff. And then you pack it in.
Yeah.
You pack it in, and you transition into this world. Like, how did that conversation go? Like, how did you guys come in and have that conversation at the dinner table or whatever it was? What was the trigger to say, we're going to change our lives to go do this thing to help others? Because fundamentally what you are. And I want to talk about the audiences too, right? Because I think that you kind of tipped your hat a little bit. That I think your primary audience, I'm going to suggest, might not have actually been the students. I feel like your primary audience might have actually been supporting the teachers, because a couple of times now I've heard you talk about Honor the Work, and some of the first things you address is actually supporting the teachers, which I'm a big fan of. I'm a big fan of it. Like, I mean, I share the story about talking to guidance counselors, being hung up in that room by accident. And it was one of the best experiences I ever got to have in terms of understanding their thirst. Like, they really want to do well. It's just like the world they're exposed to. So, okay, back it up. Let's go. You make this, you're a teacher, you're an active teacher. You've been teaching for, how long were you teaching before you did Honor the Work?
So I taught for 9 years.
9. Okay. So you got a career going. Like, this isn't like, yeah, you're in. Pensions rolling, benefits are going. You're moving up the food chain a little bit. You probably had a salary bump or two, right? You're teaching your high school, right?
And I was fortunate that I started in a rural area. And so I was the only chemistry and physics teacher, and we were from Alberta. So I was very fortunate that a lot of the things that my dad had to kind of wait till you're 30 for, I was able to get in my first few years, just because, just proximity to where I lived, just because of the teaching assignment I had. So I was teaching the grade 11 and 12 courses that a lot of people have to wait for many years. Half of our exam in grade 12, it used to be in Alberta, came from this exam at the end of at the end of the semester called the diploma exam, and I was hired to make questions for them. And I was a PD junkie. I went to the Smithsonian, I went to the US, I went to the Perimeter Institute. I was just like taking it all in, because I also knew that, at some point in time I was going to take a pause to have a family as well too. And I knew that, just given my personality, I don't like to do anything just kind of halfway. Like I want to commit to it. So as a result, that was what I was doing. And so when I was a teacher, I leaned into my career, and so I ended up going through, I taught grade 10 science, grade 11 and 12 chemistry, and 11, 12 physics and forensics. And so I taught some math as well in there. And so most of my teaching assignment was chemistry and physics, but I ended up going through more than 15 curriculum changes in 9 years. And so, that when you're in a small school, you are the one person. But I didn't want my students' education to be compromised because, we were going through rapid curriculum changes. And so I remember many times being up, at 2 a.m. still prepping. Like I did more all-nighters as a teacher than I ever did as a university student, because I wanted to make sure that my students were getting the best experience possible. And so whether it was prepping labs, early in the morning at school, or, staying up late at night to find the real world connections for my lessons, that's what I did. And so, when take a pause to be a mom, and we have 2 girls who are now grades 3 and 5. And, everything I learned as a teacher, I learned as well, I kind of took into motherhood. And then our kids taught us so much. I got to see the gender biases in some of the books. I was able to take them to science centers and children's museums and art galleries and see, what does the world look like through the eyes of a kid? And all of that, ultimately, it really translated into, like, what would I want for if I was to kind of, I guess, support education in a new role with parent lens and with an early childhood lens, and having read about Montessori and all sorts of different ways in which kids learn, how could I kind of take everything I learned from my high school years and working, in our PD committee for our school district to create vertical teams and vertical opportunities for teachers to learn of different grades. How could I take all my I learned as a mom, and then how could I take everything that my husband was doing running a national general contractor, construction company, and how could I merge it together? And that's really what happened. And so, 4 years ago, it was a conversation that Tim and our friend Jen Hancock and myself had, and we said, well, how can we be part of the solution? And so Jen was a junior high teacher, taught overseas, and then now she's a VP at a general contractor. Tim had gone from being on the tools as a high school student to, progressing from project manager to BD to ultimately running a national general contractor and scaling it. And then I was a teacher. And we said, well, how can we create a solution here? Because we each have a lens on this. And Tim said, when was the last time you heard a 13-year-old was excited to be a plumber? And Jen said, people don't know about all the auxiliary roles in construction, the marketing, the HR, all those things. And I'm saying, but as a teacher, we don't know this. We don't get workforce data. So we don't understand all these different roles. And then because we go K to 12 and back to the to university and then back to the classroom, we don't have exposure. So, it's what I've called an innocent blind spot. We don't mean to not promote these careers, but at the back of my room in my chem and physics classroom, I had tons of posters for all the post-secondary summer camps. I could write letters of reference for my students, and I did, but not one of them was for skilled trades. It was for, for going in to be an underrepresented programs, such as boys going into nursing or girls going into engineering or coding. And so I, was very much a supporter of that, but I had a blind spot to not even think, hold on a second, what's beyond this? And, growing up in an oil and gas town in Alberta, where my best friend's dad was a welder, I don't have an excuse. It was just, I think I just got so immersed in the education world, and you kind of get a little tunnel vision when you're doing your job and you're just thinking, okay, I'm teaching this and my students say they want to go here. And you don't necessarily stop and say, hold on a second. And it was a student that actually finally was the one that actually taught me to stop and really have a conversation about it. And it was the conversation with the grade 10 student that ultimately opened my eyes. So it's really a full circle where the teacher learned as much from the students as the student learned from the teacher.
And can you share that conversation? Like what happened?
Yeah. So really clever grade 10 student in my science 10 class, and he loved to dirt bike. And so he would come in after a great weekend of dirt biking, and everything was Fox branded. And I said to him one day, I said, Jordan, what do you want to do after high school? And I'd held off on this conversation for such a long time, because you think to yourself, okay, at what point in time do I initiate this conversation with a student? And he says to me, Mrs. Coldwell, I want to become an electrician. And it's like I'm still there. I just remember as clear as day, like drawing a complete blank. And I'm like, what do I say to this? And so I thought, what is the only career that I know that is anything to do with this? And, at the University of Alberta, I would walk through the building where electrical engineers were learning. And I said, what about an electrical engineer? And to the greatest credit of this very clever grade 10 student, he says, no, Mrs. Coldwell, I don't want more years in the classroom. I want to work with my hands. And at that, I thought, okay, I'm going to leave it because I don't know what to say to that. So I went home to my husband that night, and we had only been married a few years, and he was a recent engineer grad. And I said to him, I said, Tim, this is what happened. This is the conversation, thinking he'd say, cool, like, good advice. Yeah, but he didn't. He said the opposite. He shook his head, he laughed, and he said to me, Ange, if I don't understand the blueprint, I go to the people on the tools. I trust them over anyone else. And in that moment, I was like, gosh, I screwed up. I screwed up big time. And so I went back to the parents at interviews that week and told the parents, I'm really sorry. Your son said he wanted to become an electrician. I suggested engineering. He doesn't want more years in the classroom. I get that. Bad advice on my part. I'm sorry. And the parents were like, their eyes were really big when I started this, because I think they were thinking, like, what's going to happen? I think they were thinking maybe their son was going to be doing something he wasn't supposed to. And here they've got the teacher coming and saying, no, like, it was me. And I think, and then a few years later, we moved to Calgary, and I taught a lot of first generation Canadians. And the ones that would like to go into the skilled trades, they were told no. They were said that go become an electrical engineer first before becoming an electrician. And it was like coming all over again. I was like, except this time it wasn't me. It was that conversation amongst the parents. And so give it a couple more years, and we moved from Alberta to Ontario, and we say, well, you know what? I think it's time we do something. And so, I'm fortunate that I'm married to someone who believes in action. Like, he doesn't want to sit on the sidelines, and nor do I. And so we said, what could we do? And that's ultimately where we decided we could create a nonprofit, identify what the barriers were, and then try to help create solutions to be able to start to address it in a way that we thought could be meaningful and in areas that hadn't yet been addressed.
So when that's amazing. Like, I love the story. And one of the parts I really like that you highlighted too is the student was, one of your brighter students. Like, you highlighted that element, because I think there's a piece here that he shared with you, and I think that we get hung up on it a little too much. And what I mean by that is that the trades have this connection to working with your hands, and it's a simple connection, and it's not a bad connection because it's the truth. Like, you're doing, lots of people work their hands, by the way, right? Like, tell me a surgeon doesn't work with his hands. I know he uses his brain, but he uses his hands, right? So anyways, I don't have a problem with that, because it's usually sometimes, because you're in that environment and everything's kind of geared to a different, like an academic route, a quick differentiator is like, I want to work with my hands. So right away, it's like, I don't want to be in the classroom. I want to do something different. And that's the easiest way to claim it. But that has also picked up and become like, and I hear it all the time, is like, well, we just got to get to the kids who want to work with their hands. It's like, no, that's not a trait. I think that we're missing the boat on that one. I think what we're realizing, like, we need to think about a little bit is like, instead of that being a trait, a skill, I think it's actually an element of people like trying to say that I want to do something different. I want to be doing something. Like, I know lots of people that work in the trades that their scope of work or the things that they do, actually, they don't use their hands a lot. They're actually walking around doing lots of different things. They're using their brain a ton. Their hands are probably used less in that than they were even in the classroom when they were doing things like labs, like in physics and chem. But they're in a trade. They're outside. They're doing a thing that's learning while doing. Like, there's other ways to articulate that. And I really appreciate that we have to think about moving past that a little bit. Like, when you say it, it's fine. And people who aren't familiar with trades, they say it. It's cool. I get it. But I think it's a signal. It's one of those signals. It's back to that wrestling academy thing. It's like, it's a signal to say, let's dig deeper into the what are you talking about? And usually the next conversation is, I don't want any more school. I don't want to sit in the classroom. Like, those are linked almost every single time I talk to somebody about getting into a trade. They trigger those two dominoes, and that's cool. That's cool. And it's okay. You can just want to work with your hands, but usually it's a signal that something else needs to take place. I need exposure to something else. This model is going to come to an end for me, and I need to do a different model. And I don't know what those models are, by the way. Like, what are they? And so that's kind of where you guys are taking this stuff with Honor the Work. So I alluded to the fact that it felt like, and maybe I'm wrong, call me out on this, but it felt like your first audience was teachers. Like, when you're designing this, like, who are you considering? Students and teachers and students? Could you come from that world? So you know how the effort it's going to take to get something into a classroom, like how that happens, how it isn't seamless, There's tons of challenges. There's all kinds of preconceived notions. There's all these layering inside of the hierarchy of teachers and what they're allowed. And there's things like general education principles. I just learned about that this year. Like there's things you have to meet in the classroom, that education has to get approved by people who basically just live in education. So that's kind of fun. So anyways, what was the plan of attack on this? Because that had to be, I mean, you had insider trading because you totally came from being a teacher, right? And you recruited somebody who was a teacher and went into the construction sector. So I mean, you guys were like coverts here going into this. So,
We've been
what was that attack plan? Like, how did that look?
Well, before we do that, I was just going to say that when I'm talking with teachers, I always say that, when you're working with a trade, you're working with your head and your hands at the same time, which is an incredible ability. Because if you think about it, anybody who's made a beautiful meal for someone before, or they've sewn something for a family member, or you go and you buy, a luxury item, for example, like think of the Chanels and the Hermeses of the world. These are like companies that have this huge following of people, and they're so highly revered. And yet it's the same skill set as an electrician, for example, or a plumber or a tiler or a glazer. And yet why do we put value in one versus the other? And so, in both cases, you are an artist. You have to have an eye. You have to be able to imagine something, but then be able to deliver it. And that is a really artistic trait. And there's weaved in there is math and science and the ability to choose materials. And I guess just before I answer your question, I think that that's kind of the change that we have to start to have with people, I believe, is that we need to show that these are STEAM careers. Like we talk about STEM a lot, and a lot of times STEM evokes this idea of the white lab coat and the rocket scientist. But STEAM careers goes much broader than that. It's science, technology, engineering, art, math. And so the whole idea is that these careers, of in-skilled trades, they are weaving it all together. You have to understand it to be able to deliver it. And this is not something that's for people, as you mentioned, the stereotypes that couldn't get into a college or university. This is for people who simply their skill set, what they like to do, how they learn is just different than what often the school system looks like, which is a lot of pencil and paper assessments and less hands-on for a variety of different reasons. That's not a critique, just it's an observation and something I've heard from lots of teachers. And so that's really kind of when we're looking to change the perception, it's to show that these are STEM careers, or STEAM careers more correctly. And so anyway, when you asked about the teachers, the end goal for us, it was always about getting into education. And you are right, education is not financially lucrative. There's no financial motivation here at all.
No, you guys have a bad business plan. Like, I mean, I love what you do, but seriously, I think you need to go on Dragon's Den, and anything else you're gonna get shot down. But if you do get like a pillar of hope in there, that's fantastic. But yeah, I mean, I've worked with lots of people, the speaking, the engagement with students and education and that. And I call that out. And I'm saying that because you're also 4 years in, incredibly successful. The word of mouth, like when people found out I was bringing the podcast back, I was hit by a lot of folks to make sure I talk to you. So you've obviously had some impact, some big impact. You've been around for a little while. You're picking up steam and momentum. There's value in what you're doing, clearly. So, I mean, you've already broke a few stereotypes, because there is let's just say a saturation in this space of, hey, everybody, let's talk about the trades. And people are reaching out for, there's funding available from all these levels of government. So, everyone can find a way to almost make this profitable to get into this conversation because of the piece you highlighted earlier, the skills economy. Because there's an economy related to this conversation, right? And, folks, I'm going to be talking to people for, some time on this podcast, and I'm going to point some of this out, because there's an economy tied to skills development. And that's not just meaning that you can make a lot of money by harnessing skills and employment. Sure. But if I'm opening a business, I can do really well targeting the gaps in skills, the skills economy, and working in that space. And it's interesting because you use a really key word that I want everyone to think about. You open a nonprofit. And in Canada, nonprofits don't make you rich. It does not. I mean, tax-wise, you cannot. That's the whole point of a nonprofit, is you can't. And you try to, they totally call you out on it, and it's a problem. So trust me, like, this is someone who's built something for the right reasons. Like, the why is definitely in there. So let's get into that target then. Okay, so you're thinking about the teachers and the students and as the goal here.
Correct. So the end goal was always the teachers, and that was really clear from the get-go. And I'm very fortunate. Like my husband was like that was always the goal from the get-go. And so, but in order to get there, there were some things that we had to first of all do: identify barriers. And so, the barriers that we noticed was there was people who didn't know where the education, like where to get educated. They didn't know about free pre-apprenticeship programs. They didn't know about the financial aids. And so we realized really quickly that across the nation, there's all these amazing programs that are running, but often they were not well known. And having a husband in the industry, he would know about a lot of these organizations, and he would look to partner with them. And because he wanted to have people who were underrepresented, and also people who came from precarious circumstances getting an opportunity, because he's for a long time spoken to the fact that getting into construction of the trades is often one of the few ways that someone can get out of a situation that's impoverished or what have you, and be able to go into the middle class and get make a great living, and then be able to continue to progress and be able to go on and literally transform your life. And so that is at the heart of part of what we wanted to do. And so ultimately it started with the website. Then we want to tell the people stories. And so we want to tell the stories of people who are in the skilled trades to people who had never heard it before. So that's parents, for example, who are not in the skilled trades, teachers. But ultimately, the end result was we want to get into the classrooms. And the reason is that the research we found very early on was that in ages 5 to 7 are when gender biases occur. And so that is pre-critical thinking. So it means that children between ages 5 and 7, if they don't see people in diverse careers, if they don't see individuals that look like them, if they don't see, for example, female carpenters or male nurses, they do not think it's for them. And that lasts like a lifetime. It's incredibly difficult to undo that learning. And then as you get into age 8, so we're talking end of grade 2 into grade 3 and so on, we see that girls' confidence in STEM drops. And that we see as a lack of females in science-related careers, in IT, in research, math, and science. And so, how do we start to stop those stereotypes and those things from ever occurring? And then in Manitoba, here in our country, Career Trek has done research that between grades 5 and 6, it's when parents and their children are most engaged in career exploration and curious. And yet we think about, when does most career conversation occur? Maybe junior high if we're lucky, probably high school. But if we think about by the time kids get into grade 7, they're already now starting to be more influenced, by their peer group. And we have a grade 5 daughter, and we've long talked about careers, but this year it's become very noticeable amongst her peer group. They're talking about this, and so much so that one of the boys in her class said girls can't be scientists. And Isla's a headstrong young lady, and she's very articulate. And she said, "But what about Marie Curie?" And he says, "Oh, she's the only one." And then he said, she said, "No, what about the women who are in Hidden Figures? The computer scientists and engineers that got the Apollo mission to the moon." And then he quieted down. But the same kind of period of time in that week, we had a grade 4 teacher tell us that when she was reading the house that she built, both in the carpenter and the electrician areas of the book, she had male students raise their hands and say, "You mean girls can be carpenters, or girls can be electricians?" And so, there's this misperception that starts not only with adults, but then we see it with the children too. And so we need to catch them when they're young. And the way that we're able to do it is we need to make it so valuable to teachers that they say, this is helping me out. This is giving me something I don't already have. This is valuable to me. And so after lots of conversations, both with people in industry and teachers, I said, what would the ideal lesson? And they said, we'd love to have like a lesson plan that meets our curriculum, because we're very time bound. We don't have a lot of extra time for guest speakers and so on. So it needs to fit in our curriculum. We need to be able to deliver it when it fits our school year plan. We need all the lesson plans, all the video links, all the building materials, and the books, because, school districts across the country are always limited by the budget. And so having materials in the classroom, the teacher often brings them in themselves. So that means if they leave the school, they leave with them. And then of course, then there's beautiful books out there, but a lot of times people just don't know, because there are so many books, or school career, like the school book fair is kind of bringing the same kind of books year over year. So we went in search of lots of different books so that there was diversity. We were fortunate that great people like Jen Green posted as well too. And then that created a whole bunch of other people that said, "Did you know about this one and this one and this one?" And so I had like constant books that we had about 25, but all of a sudden, it jumped into like 50, and we have more than that. That I haven't quite added to the website, because there are these great books out there, and teachers want to be able to tell a story and then do an activity, but they don't necessarily feel comfortable walking into a Home Depot or into a store that they need to go buy the materials, and they're also limited by time. And they've said that, they have to prioritize literacy and numeracy because they need to make sure the students who are moving on have good reading skills and good mathematical skills. So that means that sometimes the social studies and the science sometimes can fall by the wayside, but that's often where we can get into the storytelling or talk about, did you know there was did you know there was Mohawk, Skywalkers that are the ones that, are the steel workers that have, built, been contributors and built a lot of the, the buildings in New York City, for example. Like people don't know those things. So we can weave in the social studies. We can weave in different cultures through books.
Social studies. I mean, seriously, we look at the backbone of the trades and the things that have happened since the Industrial Revolution. The trades are tied to every good and bad event. Like it's all tied together, whether it be war, whether it be depression, whether it be like you can go through the economic revolutions, like the things, the Industrial Revolution, the moving through technologies, like just you go through it, right? The housing, boom and bust and all the fun parts in between, and yeah, and how the 401 goes from one end of this province to the other, like just little things, right? Like you can definitely weave that together. And we often forget that there was somebody that had to physically do the thing.
Well, and that's exactly it. And so that's ultimately what we're trying to do with our program by creating, teacher resources that are curricular, that are engaging, that bring the real world to the classroom, that have fun did you knows, for example. So being able to talk about the Robertson screwdriver and it's, and the fact it's Canadian, or being able to talk about, various structures around the world and how they're built. All of a sudden it takes that the thought about this is an iconic structure to who built it and why did they build it and how was it built and what materials are used. And so it takes that focus not away from what they're learning in terms of the curriculum, but it just gives it another focus in terms of, but who was the person that built this and what were the contributions they made and what careers are there that link to this. And for children, when they're young, they naturally build with their hands. They're building sandcastles or Lego or what have you. So this is the perfect time to try and be able to show these to the students. And the other thing is that when we take a look at, those junior high and high school years, the kids, their brains are going through a lot of changes. I taught grade 9s and I thought, they were going to be like little grade 10s. They're not. Like their brains are literally pruning. Their neurons are like getting the ones they don't need or they're getting rid of. They're like they're not caterpillar and they're not butterfly. They're literally, in a metamorphosis. And so they're really fun, but they are their own little grade that year, and very unique and distinct. And so if we think about wanting to plant seeds, they're figuring out who they're going to become throughout those high school years, but they need to have seeds planted so that as they get experiences, into shop classes or getting to go to career fairs, they need to have had some kind of exposure before that. So it's not just like, and here you go, like they need to build up to that. And so do parents, because when kids are young, parents aren't thinking about necessarily who they're going to become or what job they should have. So it's also the time as well for parents to be kind of being exposed to just kind of like, soften that ground a little bit to give them the ideas of, okay, so there are lots of different careers out there. You maybe don't have to go into, the business, the law, the medicine, and so on. And so it's really important that this ultimately trickles home through the child when they can say, I was a mason today. I built with sugar cubes and icing, right? Like the child gets to become the vehicle, the books become the vehicle, the STEM nights at school become the vehicles. All of a sudden there's an exposure, and the parents then start to rethink. And as you mentioned, we're in a fourth industrial revolution, and we are going through massive change right now. And the next couple of decades are going to require a huge workforce for affordable housing, for the green energy transition. It's going to be massive, and we're going to literally double or triple the size of our workforce in construction and skilled trades because of the need. And so whether we're looking at EV from critical minerals mining all the way to batteries to upgrading power lines to looking at solar farms, we need to have a workforce, and we need kids to consider that if this is something they love when they were children, let's let them know there's a career path later. And especially for our neurodiverse kids who pencil and paper isn't how they communicate their learning, let's make sure that they see there's a path for them so that they don't go through years of thinking they don't belong or there's something wrong with them. They go to a college, university, and maybe they make it through or maybe they drop out depending what they choose. And then they find an apprenticeship at 26 or 28, which is kind of in our country what the average is. Yeah. That's so many years of a child just thinking, I don't fit in. And then all of a sudden when they find their fit, it's like, why couldn't we have started this years before, like decades before, so that they would have always realized there was something for them. And then it's also helpful for our economy and our workforce. And so, education and workforce, they work in parallel, they need to work together.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, there's a couple of comments I'd love to throw in there. Like, so the average age being 27, 28, I've seen it peaked up to 30 in some of the trades, right? And I hate to tell everybody this, but that's like, for that individual, it's probably like $1 million worth of earnings when you work it out that was left on the table. So when we talk about people unable to afford homes, like a young person, I can never move into this community. I can never, because they haven't been earning at a rate that would match inflation. Like I'm not justifying house prices, and I'd love to see that all change. But I'm just saying from the standpoint, like there's $1 million worth of earnings that somebody had at a young age where their overhead is usually their lowest ever. Like they can sleep on a couch for a year. So if they were to make $65,000 that year and have a small room as opposed to an entire home, like they're in a strong position, and they will be in a strong position over time, instead of just sleeping on that room and going to school and accruing debt and not figuring out where you're going to go. And I'm not saying one's wrong or the other, because you do need one vehicle for some careers. There's an option to, there's sort of professional careers, there's academic based careers. There is a place for everything. All right, I'm always for that. And we get caught up, and I know you'll be a proponent of that based on your history and background. I've heard you say it, before, and I've followed your social media channels. So I know you talk about all of that. What I worry about sometimes in the space, and I'm sure you've come across it, is the pendulum piece where it's like either or. Like there's just such a mentality these days on either or, like good or bad. So like this is good, which means this is bad. Well, no, it doesn't. It's just like, I know people that it makes sense to actually go to college for a year or two of a techniques program. And there's people that hate me for saying that. But I would say to them, like, they're still a child. At 18, they're still young. And maybe they're not ready for the job site for a lot of reasons. Like there's just a lot of things that aren't functioning the same way. They haven't even got their driver's license yet. They haven't gone through those types of challenges. They haven't lived independently. They haven't had those pieces that made them grow up because of whatever rationale. Like, no one's at fault. It's just a reality, right? And if I'm going to take someone and have them in a trade, right, with exposure early helps, because then they can start to align themselves. And I would say that if we can do that better, what you're doing, I think we could have more 18-year-olds actually ready, 18, 19, 20-year-olds ready to start an apprenticeship, like ready. Like they got a bit more headspace around it. They've been doing things when they're picking part-time work or their co-op placement in high school. They're picking things that are like supportive to this concept of going to work in a trade. And it helps prepare them, makes them job ready. As I'm a little bit closer to be job ready. They give a crap about being job ready. Like they actually want to be on that job site. So these things move. The other option is that they decided last year they want to be an apprentice or they want to get into a trade. They go on some website, they pick one or two trades they think they want to do, and then they try to work with somebody to get on a trade. They don't stand a chance in hell. They don't. Even if they get in, they're not staying, because the culture shock, because of the thought process of things. They have barriers and stigmas built up, the perceptions of what they think a trade's going to be or isn't going to be. All these pieces that come with it. The odds of them sticking around is very, very small. And I will say this from the industry standpoint, at least I can speak to the people I've engaged with, and this doesn't mean everybody is a blanket statement, but there's a lot of apprehension about this influx of individuals that haven't really been exposed or have a predisposition to trades. There's a hesitancy. There's a reason why nepotism was really common in the trades. And it's not because of laziness, and not because of bad HR practices or not having HR. It's because people know it's a tough space to get into, and the expectations are quite high out of the gate for the ethic, the show up, the accountability, all those other intangibles. And yeah, we want some hand skills, and yeah, we want some numeracy and literacy. We want to be able to have a conversation with you. You got to be able to tell people what is wrong or what you need, or to clearly understand instructions and those types of things. And those things have been happening for years. Now they have labels and names, but they've just always happened. And so with all that being said, that doesn't happen overnight. It takes 4 to 5 years to make a journey person from day one as an apprentice. It also takes a few years to get somebody ready to be an apprentice. It's the same way it takes somebody a few years to be ready to go to university or college. And people leave that narrative out as this is an alternate to, well, university or college isn't going to work. Go ahead and apply for a trade. No, you just drove a few hundred miles in one direction to go somewhere, and then you're saying the alternative is the other direction, 400 plus miles. Like, just get there. You'll be fine. You'll be there. Just hop on a plane. You'll be perfectly fine. No, you won't. You spend all that time preparing yourself for one path. The person in their headspace is not there. Their learning style isn't there. This isn't something I haven't considered before for many reasons. And it could be not exposed. That's fine. But it doesn't mean they're ready to go run their first race just because they got a pair of running shoes. Like you got to help a little bit of this culture piece. And so I really appreciate your insertion point into the system, because you picked a very difficult space, I would say, for people to feel confident to do something different. I think we're spoiled because of the background of yourself and your husband and how you brought yourselves to the space. Having that conversation with teachers, you having that conversation with a teacher versus me, you know how to talk their language and talk about how to make it effective. So there's effectiveness to the goals, the common shared goals. I go in there almost as a criticism, saying you're doing it wrong. No matter how I say it, it's going to come across as I'm saying you're doing it wrong. And so you're able to embrace this. And so we really should be, I'm grateful, and I know others are as well, that you took this upon yourselves to tackle this conversation in this space. I know others are trying and they're doing good work in the space as well, but working with the teacher specifically to help them do well with the work they're doing as curriculum, that's creating like what I would call a systems change. You're creating that curriculum changes. So year over year, you're normalizing, and it becomes just part of the way things are, the same way we've had it be the way it is for 20, 30 plus years. Exactly. Right. And we see the consequences of that. Right. Yeah. Or outcomes, we'll call it. Okay. I won't call it consequences. Now we can have this situation where we can create new outcomes that create that proverbial third option.
And that's the thing. And to get new outcomes, we need new solutions. And so that was what we thought was missing. And so we thought, well, if we could prove the idea, so we self-funded, and we decided that if we could prove the idea ourselves and show that there was merit to it, then perhaps we could start to show that there was a different way of doing things that hadn't been considered before. And you're right. I think that the messenger is as important as the message. And because I'm a teacher and I talk teacherese, like there's a different way that I go about presenting. But at the same time, I get to come home every night and I say to my husband, I say, okay, so what does the industry need? And what are the industry data? Like, what's the industry data? So, Tim's the one that he gave me all the statistics initially. And then I've since gone and found more. But he started off with like, this is where we're at as an industry. And so he can talk to me about that side of things. And then I can go communicate to teachers. So I can bring the workforce in, but then I bring the brain research for early education and say, this is why we need it now. And teachers are so receptive to it. It's just like I said earlier, we never had this before. And I like to live in the world of gray because I think things are not black and white. I think everything is mixed. The more that we can feel comfortable putting those pieces together, the better. And you mentioned, children, brain research now shows us that kids are still, their brains are maturing for girls often into like 25, boys until 30. So when you're talking about readiness, it's funny. We know that there's a readiness for when they're going to walk. There's a readiness for when they're going to talk. And they show us that. There's also a job readiness too, that, they're sometimes just not ready for that. Some kids are job ready very early. Maybe they grew up on a farm, or maybe they, like you said, it's if they're the seventh generation. We found one family. There's they're the third generation. There's 7 carpenters in their family. They just grew up with it. So there was a very early comfort there. But for some people, this is the first person in their family that's going to go in a skilled trade, and it's fantastic. They're really excited about it, but they also need to realize that they're not used to necessarily that you're going to work yourself out of a job and then you're going to be hired for a new job. Like it's a different than say people who are working in a degree program where there's just this consistency. Trades are a little bit different that way. And I was talking with a president of a large general contractor, and he was saying he's got a family member who he was counseling through this. He's like, it's normal, like this is just the way it goes, but it's different, and people aren't used to that.
Yeah, success is unemployment, and that's a really hard thing to say to somebody where you make a great wage, you're learning on the job and all these pieces, and you're telling an apprentice like, yeah, hurry up, get that done so we can get out of here. And then the question is, well, what do we do next? I don't know.
The next job.
The next job. Well, where's that? I don't know. There'll be one. And here's the thing: you're only going to get to that next one when you do well on this one. And doing well on this one means it gets done well and probably ahead of schedule. So it's like this really chasing your tail mentality, and it's hard to get your head around. And if you haven't been exposed to that, like that's where that multi-generational thing, like in terms of the trades, is that's okay. Like I've seen my dad or my uncle, like, that they can say, or, my aunts, they've had time in between jobs. They work again. They've never sacrificed. They've always got vacations. They got things my parents actually want because they have it. And like, that normalizes that life. Right. And I hate to call it a lifestyle, but it's kind of a world, right? It's how that economic world works and how the world of work there processes. But yeah, you don't get exposed to that. Like that's where the parents are all on board until their kid goes to their first job and gets laid off. Yes. And then the parents are not on board anymore because they're like, whoa, they're supposed to be doing this forever. What's going on? Like what's happening? And I'll tell you, I've been in situations where I've had parents call the union hall because their 20-year-old, Johnny or Julie got laid off and they want to know what they did wrong. And I have to explain, no, they did really good. Why they get laid off? I'm like, that's kind of how it happens. Like there's other apprentices who got laid off before the job finished. They're the ones that are having the problems. The ones that got to stay to that job to the end, and unfortunately there wasn't another place to go right now. I said, do you get paid to do nothing? No. I said, okay. Well, your son or daughter is not going to get paid to do nothing either. Like that's just how it works. There's nothing to do right now. That's just how this works. And so I'm sorry. And so this is a big, big one. I'm sorry that we kind of uncovered one. This is a big one and when people get interested and they get this whole piece, understanding how the system works, this is really important to be putting into context when we're talking to youth. And I
And
say,
that's
this is a more of a teenager conversation, I would say, because they understand going to work and that you don't get paid for doing nothing. This is where we have to normalize that conversation a bit more. So thinking of that, honor the work, elementary, right? Okay.
yeah.
What does honor the work high school look like?
Interestingly enough, we are going to stay in the elementary realm. So we have a lot of people
Really?
that ask us about that. Yeah, and the reason being is that we think that there's a lot of organizations across the country that do an exceptional job of being able to expose children in grades 7 and up, right? So we
Okay.
have the All Skills Canada affiliates that will go in and talk to students often, and teachers, we've been told to often bring them in grade 7 and 8 for the talk, because those students that are going off to high school. We also know that they can start to take tech programs in grades 9 and 10 and
They
so
start.
on.
Yeah, it's happening now finally. Yeah.
And so I think that when we take a look, those organizations in the school system, that they've kind of taken that on. Where we saw that there was no one taking on was in the grades 1 to 6, and so we see that there's interest across the country for this. So we're expanding into Alberta this coming fall in September of 2024. We have interest from BC. We had someone reach out from Quebec. We have someone that I had a call with the UK yesterday. Someone who there is like looking at elementary careers there, because the current government has said that elementary careers is really important. And then, as you were talking about with Australia, that conversation came up what Australia is doing, because they're doing a lot of really interesting things too.
Oh, they do. And we don't pay attention. No one pays attention to Australia enough. And I got exposed to them through the labor movement and exposed to them through they're 20 years ahead of us with getting rid of asbestos in our living world. So anyways, I've just kind of watched, and then you get exposed down this rabbit hole and you're like, we just literally could take that playbook and copy it. Like it is, they're doing so well at so many things. And I'm just like, this is not, and I mean, if we want to really get into the geographics and the economics of it all, like they're virtually same size, structure, population. Like, yes, we got more land mass, but when you really work it all out, it's kind of really similar. Like even our GDPs, everything's really, really similar actually. So anyway, sorry, it's a bit of a nerd moment on Australia. Yeah.
No, I think no, they are. They're doing really fantastic things, and I think that's part of why staying in the grade 1 to 6 space makes so much sense for a variety of reasons, because there's so much learning that can happen from other places as well too. We have Career Trek that's done research about that grade 5 and 6 being the key time to expose children and parents to careers. There's different research being done in other places. About the importance of exposing children to careers. In fact, that came from the UK. There's this beautiful video that they shot around the world in China. In I think it was in South Africa, in Victoria, BC, in the UK, about having children were asked in a classroom to draw, what does a race car driver look like, and what does a police officer look like.
This.
Right, it was like 2/3 were males that were drawn. This comes from the UK. So I think that there's just so much research that we can look to, and how we can try and make our program continuously better. And we also want to continually evolve it so that we're keeping track, we're keeping up with the workforce needs, so that if we all of a sudden, we're going to need a lot more people in the EV sector. Okay, so in grade 6, we have a lot of that right now, but where else can we put it in, so that, we're trying to create that bridge between workforce and education. And that's really what we're trying to do.
And I gotta say something, as a workforce person, what I love about this, right? And I've had this problem, like this conversation for years, right? People will come to me and they go, we need green building jobs. And I kind of go, I said, what do you need? We need green building skills. I go, I say, we have them, right? They go, no, we don't. And I go, okay, so first of all, I'm an insulator. So that's borderline insulting, because that's all I do is energy management. So it's like the nature of what I do is we didn't even know how to call it green. And we were, keeping people warm and keeping people cool when needed, and helping these systems be more functionable, right? I always say to the HVAC technicians and to the sheet metal workers and to the plumbers and that, I'm like, we make your stuff look good so people like what you charge. So that's what we do, and we make it work better. But that's the only claim we got. But anyways, and most people don't even know we're on their systems. But it's a great synergy. And I mean, there's so many elements about how all this stuff goes together that kids can even connect with to find pinch points, or entrance points that work for them, instead of having to think of the fact they got to build everything. But anyways, I talk about this a lot because, we look at, there's a bridge in Windsor, Ontario right now being finished, the Gordie Howe Bridge. And some people might be familiar with this. If you're not, if you're even into construction, architectural, this is a really cool bridge. It's borderline what they're calling a living bridge, because the bridge will adjust with weather and stuff. And it's insane. Okay. But let's not forget, the artisans, which was a piece I would love to get back to a little bit at some point. If we don't do it today, we'll do it again. But, the original tradespeople, artisans, craft, guild workers, whatever they've all been called over generations and hundreds of years, right? Essentially, these are people that are doing a craft, a skill with their hands, jewelers, go through it, cooks, spice makers, whatever. It's where it all came from. Okay, folks. So people find different materials to work with to do different things, and that's where these crafts kind of go. There's your history lesson. So with that being said, bridges were like log bridges over a waterway. Then they eventually became like stone, which was really fancy. And then someone would be like, we're going to use concrete. It's impossible. You can't make a concrete bridge. You drive over them all the time. There's concrete bridges all the time, and that are massive. And you ever look at a concrete bridge and say to yourself, how the heck is that even staying up? Because it's so massive when you think about it. And if you ever watch them pour one, it's shocking how much concrete is in the air and yet can handle so much stuff. And it's like these people that go take these jobs and do this work, yes, there's an engineer. Yes, there's all these people that are behind all of that, but the people doing the work still have to deliver to the plan. Like, just because it's on paper does not mean that's how it comes out. The person has to know their craft to make sure it can meet these parameters. So anyways, all that being said, right, we evolved to a point we have a bridge that is like artificial intelligence. The thing moves with the weather. Like, it knows how to adjust itself to reduce stresses. Like, that's been built by the same craft people along the way. Yes, the engineers have advanced. Yes, architects, the planning, the concepts, the pies in the sky, but the same trades move along with these innovations. And so that often gets overlooked when someone says to me, I need a trade to do this thing. And I'm like, well, that's this trade. That trade will work with those new materials because they've done it for years. Like, my trade started by installing horsehair. Horsehair was the insulator because it's hollow. And so that was eventually the first thing. Then it advanced into different types of fibrous materials, and it was always about that. And then we had this really bad thing with asbestos for a long time. And then we moved away from that, and like, we have rubber-based materials. Like, we have things now that are cellular, like, and the technology behind that. And that's what you learn in trade. So you learn to work with all those things, and all of a sudden something new comes along. The cool part about being a trade, it's structured to learn. Like, kind of, if you're in the trade, it's learning in a way you like learning. So you have cool things happen, like a manufacturer will come out and say, hey, we got this brand new material, and there's these new tools. Here comes a bunch of free lessons, lunches, free coats and hats because we want you promoting it, and we'll come work with your contractor, and the contractor gets recouped for their day, and the staff get to have exposure to it. And these are cool things that happen in the trades. Like, you think you have assemblies in high school, this is what you get in the trades, right? And you get free stuff, and you get paid for it. So like, they happen. Okay. So anyways, I always like to link that one because it's like the closest thing to when you got to have that assembly to get out of class. It's kind of like the equivalent.
And I love that you say that, because that's also where you get the excitement for kids too. Because we now know as well that millennials and Gen Zs, and we're raising alphas at our household, they want to be something that's part of bigger than themselves. They want to have a meaningful job as well too. They want to be part of the climate solution. If you start to talk to them about the fact that there's these really new materials, like you can now put this cool paint that was developed, that will reflect light, for example, so it's going to decrease the urban heat island, the amount of heat that gets trapped, for example, by our black asphalt and dark buildings, for example. We can talk to them about that. We can talk to them about how they love to game. So did you know having a VR headset and walking around on a job site before you've actually broken ground and being able to find the mistakes or show your client what this is going to look like? Do you know there's a job for you in this one? Do you know that if you like to game, you can use a joystick, and you can be able to run X, Y, and Z equipment using this? Like, there's a really exciting time if we can find that way to be able to connect with students with what they're interested in, the material side of things, the climate change solutions, the use of technology. Put on look at a Hilti exoskeleton.
Yeah,
really cool.
That's pretty cool.
Was right. Like, there's a lot of neat ways that when we look at the materials that are coming out, the research that's happening, the ability to even look at nature, and it's using it as inspiration in terms of the way in which architects are finding ways to be able to make cooler buildings, for example, that are going to need less AC, like less air conditioning, but be able to be designed in such a way that they're going to be naturally kind of mimicking things in nature that are already self-cooling or much better. There's a lot of neat stuff here, and kids are excited by stuff like that. And so all of a sudden, the construction industry isn't, hot and dirty in the summer and it's cold in the winter. All of a sudden it's like, okay, you're building something that's going to stand the test of time. It's going to outlast you. You're going to use neat materials. You're going to be able to tie in skills that you already like to use, like gaming, for example, or building. And all of a sudden you start to paint a picture to them that this is not what they think it is, or how it's perhaps perceived to them. And so that's part of it too, that storytelling.
It's one of the few careers that, no one, I don't know, I know it gets said, but I don't get to hear it reverberated by tradespeople enough, is that you don't do the same thing forever. Yeah. Like, you might have a project where you're using the same material. You might go through a run of 3 or 4 projects and take you a few years and you're using basically the same materials and applications or whatever, but there moments will come when things change, and you get to be there part of that change. Like, you don't have to go hunting for it. You don't have to force the change. And this is a big deal. Like, a lot of people get into careers and they get to that point, and like social media is full of it, where it's like making a decision to leave your job or change your life because these things are all complicated. How about you go to a job where it changes all the time? You don't need to change your life. Your life gets to be, you need your life at home to be stable, because at work it's changing all the time. And you come home to actually do that unwind, that rest, relax. And oh, by the way, you can afford it. Like, it's super helpful to have those balances out of there too. So, and there's all these fulfillment pieces too. Like, there's lots of data out there for that. But I mean, John Gallagher, a lot of people know Dr. John Gallagher, talks about how, one of the most important factors for people, being successful in selecting a career is actually if it makes them happy. And the trades actually happen to be one of the happiest places for people to work. And he's done the research on that, and it's out there, and it shows that, people go to the trades and they have lots of crappy days, and they have lots of tough challenges, and they have all kinds of things that happen to them. And yeah, there's high risk for accidents and all kinds of stuff, health and safety wise, and weather. And welcome to Canada, where it's horrible all year round when you're trying to do construction, because it's never the right temperature. It's like 2 weeks of the year, it's like the perfect temperature to do construction, and then otherwise it sucks. So it's like you have all these factors, yet these are the happiest people at work. Happiest. Yeah. And it's like that there's something to that. And it's about that fit, right? And it's I know that doesn't mean everyone's going to be happy. I know plenty of people that aren't. And this is really important, like helping normalize the opportunity, the equitable component that you're sharing from a young age, to normalize the consideration to, because just as many kids would all of a sudden take up that idea that this could be me, there's also just as many kids that can say this won't be me. And that's really good, by the way. Like, I get on this conversation a lot. It's like, it's helpful. It's helpful. Like, we've tried different hiring practices over the years, and like we did like mass hiring and stuff like that. And we end up with a retention rate, sometimes around 30%. And people go, oh, that's really horrible. And I go, is it though? Because there's 70% of people, that group, that aren't in the trade, but probably would be very detrimental to the trade. It's detrimental to everybody else's learning, health and safety on a job site, themselves, their own lives, and how that system works, the contractors who are investing in them. Like, there's a whole economic engine here. And you put pieces in that don't fit or work, cause a lot of problems for a lot of people. So there's a lot of, front end work that needs to be done for people getting into the trades. And I really appreciate that you guys are focused on that early of an insertion point, as I mentioned, and that you're going to double down on that. It's easy to get caught up with, let's do something for high school. And that was, I threw that your way because I was really curious what you were going to say. And I'm really glad, I'm proud to say that you guys are doing awesome stuff, and not going to stretch yourself out for the sake of like, and that's a typical capitalist mentality, right? It'd be like, okay, I can do all of this now, but you're really focusing on how do we make the effective impact that was our goal from day one to help this change and help this support this system. So saying that, I do have another question though, another thing that could be utilized down the road. And that is in teachers and their original education. So teachers in there getting you get a BA, then you have to go to teachers college is how we've always referred to it. Probably has a better name. What about looking at curricula for there? So then, your tools and resources that are getting, meet the equivalency of the, what they need to do to teach in a classroom, like the curriculum, right?
Ministry of Education. I'm all for it. I had this conversation actually with our Minister of Education that has recently now switched roles, and it was just a very informal conversation the first time I met him, and he was on board with this as well too. And I think that it's huge. We have right now in our pilot, we had student teachers with one of our schools that's nearby. So I've been to the school numerous times, and I've talked specifically with the student teachers about what their undergraduate program looks like. And so it's still, I think, very much, my perception is it's still very much taught as silos. Like, you have your literacy unit and your science unit and so on, and life isn't like that. We need multidisciplinary, multi-curricular, multi-sensory learning, and that's how we learn best as adults, but it's how kids learn best. And so really, I think that one of the things that, I know that, we did an event with George Brown College, which is in Toronto, and they're 2 stops away from OISE, which is the University of Toronto's educational faculty. Being able to have education students go to a technical college and actually get to tour around and hear what does a millwright do, for example, what is a glazer, being able to see what it's like, hear from people, I think is really key, because we know that if we could get into the the education training, with undergrads, all of a sudden that those individuals come out and they have just a very different perception. They're not just going to go back to defaulting to the careers that are currently the ones that are promoted, just again because of that innocent blind spot of what we know. But all of a sudden they'd have a whole spectrum of other careers, and they'd also know the workforce data behind it as well too. And I think as educators, it would also make them that much more aware that there are neurodiverse learners in their classrooms. So the more hands-on activities they can do, and the more multisensory, the more real-world applications they can bring to their classroom and careers, the more just will engage their students, and it'll really help those students to figure out who do they want to become, and just plant seeds over time. So I I think it's huge. I think it's really, really important. And I would love to be able to see more of that. And that would be a conversation I would be open to any day of the week. I think that
Wow.
we really need to back again, we need to look as far upstream as we possibly can. And so if we can start with our, with the kids who are already, students in the ed programs and the undergrads, when they go out to practicums, they bring that excitement and that knowledge. They will then help that grassroots movement to be able to share with their cooperating teacher, who's the experienced teacher in the classroom who they're working with. They can share it with them. And then, right. And then all of a sudden, it just, again, who will share it with somebody else. And it just starts to spread, because we've had, I think one of my frustrations is I like to see action. And so when you hear that for, this is the skilled trades, we knew that there was going to be a skilled trades gap and crisis for decades, and nothing was done. And then, or not enough was done, maybe I should say. And so, I would like to see a rapid change. Well, how do you get a rapid change? Well, if you work with educators, that's one thing that all of us have to go through in a country, right? We all have to go through school. And if we're working with educators who are now informed, and we're informing the next group of educators to come through, and we're talking at conferences, well, now all of a sudden we're reaching a lot of people. And now all of a sudden a grass movement can become amplified. It can become accelerated in a way that normalizes it amongst the youngest kids. And then that's, we're getting the ministries information, we're getting it on the news, we're getting, national as well as federal, provincial, and municipal, needs. People are hearing it. We need affordable houses. We need to have houses and schools built. We need to have new roads built and so on. So we're getting the adults hearing that. But if we start now with the children too, all of a sudden that will intersect, and that will intersect in a matter of years as opposed to, a decade. And we don't really have a decade. We have, if we need 3.5 million houses in Canada by 2030 to reach affordability again, we need this done quite rapidly. And I think that we have the opportunity, because we have a movement now post-pandemic where people realize these careers are essential, and they realize that they pay well and they're personally and financially and intellectually rewarding. So we kind of have this moment in time that I really thought, if we don't capture it now, we may not get it again. And so to me, rolling out our program in Ontario this year, it was the second year of the new science curriculum. And so we know that teachers often don't get new resources to support their curriculum for 2 to 3 years after it's implemented. So, getting in year 2 was really key for me. Alberta's rolling out brand new curriculum this year and next. So getting in right away so that we can just start to plant those seeds immediately, which is really the idea. It's kind of like that timing issue. You kind of have to make sure that you're presenting something in a way that's timely but useful and valuable, and that's really what we're trying to do. And it's also why I don't want to expand past grades 1 to 6, because I want to make sure that as you're making resources, it's a lengthy process. It takes me like a full month just to go through the curriculum for a province and match up the activities and make new activities and get them all ready to go, and then get them field tested. And that's like up at 5 a.m. and going to bed at 11 o'clock at night. It's a long month, but it has to happen. And then once now it's being tested, it's being reviewed right now for us in Calgary by our partners, and they're giving me the feedback. So when it rolls out in September, we've had lots of eyes on it. So now we're going to be able to hopefully deliver something to teachers that's really useful. But if we don't get into as much upstream as we can, then we can't have the maximum impact. And we've talked about this off camera. We're in a state in our country right now where we need workforce. We need everyone to be matched to a career that's meaningful to them. And if we're missing that, we really, most importantly, for the sense of belonging, we don't want people to have a lack of sense of belonging. But for people that want to look at it from just an economical point of view, we can't have people who are not matched to careers that are being able to provide them with a meaningful living that they can contribute and afford. And also as a nation, we can't afford it either. We really can't. It's a bigger issue than just education or workforce. It's a national issue in terms of we need people to feel that they have a spot, that they have a job, that they can afford things, that they can have a future, that their children can have a future. It's part of something bigger than just the conversations that sometimes we hear as little sound bits, right?
Yeah. And I was going to say, and I appreciate that insight, Angela. I mean, it's some fantastic building out of maybe the piece I would like to address as well, is that I think we kind of, I don't know if we dodged a bullet, but man, we've made the past 10 years have been pretty mistake ridden around this conversation of helping promote, advocate, reduce barriers, increase pathways to skilled trades, all that stuff. It really has been a lot of lip service. That was the effort that was done for a long time. And I've been on a lot of tables with governments past and present in different provinces that have said things like, marketing campaign, bus ads. It's like this stuff they do, right? It's just like, this is going to help. And it really just spent taxpayer dollars. I maybe there's 1 or 2 people out there that kind of triggered something, but it usually isn't connect to the employability element of anything. The fact that your husband, you could have stayed doing what you're doing and try to insert, your influence in the capacity you had as a teacher, right? And your husband doing what he's doing in the industry, and you guys could have done that. Instead, you put your money where your mouth is, and you got off the sidelines and said, "Look, we're gonna get into this." And the focus and the primary goal. And if you haven't heard it over this episode, and you're just, I don't know, you're not listening to what's being said. It's all about making this effective impact upstream and helping. Really, you're looking at a foundational piece. You're getting in to build the foundation for wherever these paths and minds go in respect to whether it is the skill trades or not the skill trades. And that's fantastic because you're making it normal, you're making it acceptable, you're letting the boys and the girls and the gender biases be erased. You're introduced at such an early age that help eliminate that, which we've seen for many years on other jobs, right? I mean, other careers. Like I remember watching when they went from the male police officer to the female police officer in our education stuff. Like you can. There's a point when that happened, right? So we're seeing more of that. You're tackling a few things at the same time in this conversation. The fact that you're doing it in partnership with the teachers instead of just standing on the sidelines and like booing them, which has been the trend. The trend is just to sit on like the sideline and complain that education doesn't have it right. Is putting your money where your mouth is and getting into that space to say, how can I help? How can I help you do better? Because fundamentally, I know you want to. And they're 100%, yes, let's do better. Like we would love to do better on this. But by the way, my job has me doing all these other things to do this job well. I don't have the mental capacity to do this, and the resources are strapped, right? And there's a comment you said about the resources, and I challenge anybody. We're heading into summer. So when you hit August, I want you to go to your Walmart, your Giant Tiger, and your dollar store, and I want you to really watch the people that are in there shopping and filling up the carts. And you're going to see who they are, the teachers. And the crazy part is, most of that is not even in their budget. Most that's well beyond their classroom budget. It's them building and planning, and I'm giving a shout out to them for that because I know this. I've bumped into my kids' teachers in the stores and what they've been doing, and we had lots of lengthy conversations because I'm that guy, talks to everybody. And yeah, I know that stuff isn't required. But for them to be effective and help all the kids learn to their best to meet that curriculum and do those things, like teachers go that far. I mean, kudos to you and your husband and Honor the Work and the team over there for you guys jumping into the sandbox where it's not popular, it's not lucrative, it's time consuming. It's probably just as time consuming as it was before. The rewards you can't even measure. I mean, a smile on a face, but kids smile often when guests come to the room. So, that's hard to measure. You don't know for years if this is going to have an impact, but you're committed, you're doing the homework, you're doing the research. There's value. Clearly there's value because across the globe, people are reaching out and saying like, how do we work with you to do more of this? You guys really have cracked an egg here that's going to make a big difference. And I mean, tip my hat because it's fantastic. We're so grateful from the industry for people doing this type of work, the work that you guys are doing in all this. So with all that being said, where can people find your stuff? Like if there's any educators listening who haven't come across you yet, what's your website? Where's your social media handles? What else? Where can they find you and learn more or to connect with you?
You bet. So our website's honorthework.ca. It's the Canadian spelling, so HONOUR, honorthework.ca. We are on Instagram, honorthework.ca. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Facebook. We have a TikTok channel. We have a YouTube channel, which you can just go right to our website for as well too, and you'll find it all there. And then you can also just email me directly as well from the website or DM me on LinkedIn as well. We just really wanted to do something to help. That was really where it came from. It was nothing more than that. We just said, what could we do? And so that was really what it was about. And so, now we're fortunate enough that we do have sponsorship coming on board and we have interest. And now the biggest thing is just to continue to help create a movement. And we do it with teachers and with industry. It's not in isolation. It's a team effort.
All right. Thanks very much. And this has been a great chat. I really appreciate the time you've given on this conversation. There's a chance I'm probably going to try to pull you back on. At the very least, I'm going to want to try to pick on some teachers that you've worked with as well to hear their take on the impact and, how this is changing their curriculum and where it goes. And there'll be some familiar faces I know that are going to show up on the show that you've probably worked with, whether it's be the Council of Tech Ed or some others there. So I know you're going to come across some folks.
That's fantastic. Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, and thank you for the work you're doing. It's truly awesome.
Awesome. And so in the description below, folks, links to everything Angela highlighted for honorthework.ca, all their socials, their websites, and they got a lot of really good things going on their social media to learn a deeper dive. And I love the fact that your social media features everybody else. It's not about you, which is good for you because I have to do my own social media and it's horrible and I try my best, but I'm old enough that it's odd. The younger generation has a kickstart on that one. They're comfortable with it. So
yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's not about us. This is meant to be a service to other people. So I don't want to be on there.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, Angela, and have a great one.
Thanks.
Artlist.io